This is the DP Show,
where insanity sounds sane.
And now, the man, the myth, the legend in his own mind, D. Palmer.
It's the DP Show. I'm D.S. Palmer. We're getting you ready for another Diamondback broadcast. It's going to be starting in roughly a half hour. Diamondbacks, who just came off a sweep of Los Angeles in California, now going to the other coast to take on the Phillies in Philadelphia. Ian Kennedy, who's been pitching very well, is going to be taking on the not-traded Joe Blanton. There was rumors that Baltimore was interested in the Phillies starter, but deal wasn't done there, so the Phillies, who were in sell mode, now are coming off a series where they played pretty well, but also have Cliff Lee on the waiver wire, though I imagine he's going to make it because of that hot mess of a contract. The Diamondbacks will probably be running into a lot of these different players and pitchers who are still in uniform, but right now it's going to be Kennedy and Blanton, and that's coming up. Before we get to that, have this great opportunity to talk about this idea that has supposedly been separating conservatives and liberals, and that is the traditional schism between the two about the size of government, and how recently, especially over the last couple of presidents, we've seen that it doesn't matter which side of the aisle they're on, Republican or Democrat, government's always going to be expanding and encroaching. My favorite illustration of this is going back to the 2000 election, where President, or would-be President Bush, then Governor Bush, is railing against the Gore campaign because these guys are proposing the largest government in the history of the United States of America, the biggest federal government that the country had ever seen. And meanwhile, what's being unspoken and an opportunity lost by the Gore campaign was that the second largest proposed government was that of Governor Bush. So here this compassionate conservative, or he who is promoting compassionate conservatism, is railing against somebody for proposing to do an awful lot of spending if it was put into office, and he's doing essentially the same thing. Even bigger than Bill Clinton's government was President Bush's proposed government. And what did we see? Just that. Not just the expanded welfare programs, but also all those wars. They're expensive. And we fast forward then to Obama, who campaigns as being a constitutional scholar, among other things, also going to start repealing things like wars in Iraq and holding facilities in Guantanamo Bay, and doesn't get rid of any of those things. So even if you're going to sign off on having a larger government by electing a Democrat, per se, you're going to then make sure that you continue to have all of the different military arms that are being put in place by the Republicans. And usually this is done under helpful auspices, right? We need to be more compassionate conservatives, so we're going to do things like have the largest expansion of Medicare and Medicaid that had ever been seen since the Nixon administration, says President Bush. We need to make sure that we're safe. So even though I campaigned on all these different elements of repeal as far as our foreign policy is concerned, I'm going to keep us safe by keeping those things in place, says President Obama. Well, we're seeing something very similar to that right now in Arizona, or even just the Southwest, where it is apparent, or at least it's being claimed, that there is a big water issue that has been brewing and is starting to really rear its ugly head. The Arizona Republic had published last week that the state of Arizona has technically been in drought conditions for the last 15 years. And furthermore, last week or 2 weeks ago, on the Economic Collapse blog, they cited something called foodandwaterwatch.org, where the claims were made that the western United States is in severe long-term water crisis. Severe long-term water crisis. What's that look like, and what does it mean? Well, according to foodandwaterwatch.org, California has a 20-year supply of fresh water. California, of course, is massive in both area and population, and it only has 20 years of fresh water left, according to foodandwaterwatch.org. New Mexico, which is still pretty big but doesn't have near the population as even, say, Arizona, it only has 10 years. 10 years of fresh water in New Mexico. Well, what does that mean to us here in Arizona? Well, geography majors, those of you who can identify the Pacific Ocean, you know what I'm talking about. California and New Mexico flank Arizona. But even just to even broaden it out even further, the U.S. interior west is the driest it's been in 500 years, according to foodandwaterwatch.org. In 500 years, incidentally, the U.S. interior west is also as populous as it's ever been, ever. And with all these people, not just all these people, and I'm not going to start sounding like an environmental kook. I'm just stating fact here, but you go down to Phoenix and everybody wants to have the yards like they had back in the Midwest or whatever, grass and all that stuff. It's natural then when all these people come to use all this water, the place is going to dry up. It's natural. How dry could it be? Well, according to foodandwaterwatch.org, Lake Mead has a 50% chance of running dry by 2021. Lake Mead, that giant thing on the Arizona-Utah border, could dry up by 2021. In fact, the Colorado River is drying up. I'm going to read to you from Jonathan Waterman. He had written it not long ago that 50 miles from the sea, 1.5 miles south of the Mexican border, I saw a river evaporate into a scum of phosphates and discarded water bottles. This dirty water sent me home with feet so badly infected that I couldn't walk for a week. And a delta once renowned for its wildlife and wetlands is now all but part of the surrounding parched Sonoran Desert. According to Mexican scientists whom I met with, the river has not flowed to the sea since 1998. If the Endangered Species Act had any teeth in Mexico, we might have a chance to save the giant sea bass, totoaba, clams, the Sea of Cortez shrimp fishery that depends upon freshwater returns, and dozens of bird species. So let this stand as an open invitation to the former Secretary of the Interior and all water buffaloes who insist upon telling us that there is no scarcity of water here in the Mexican Delta. Leave the sprinklered green lawns outside the Aspen conferences. Come with me, and I'll show you a Colorado River running dry from its headwaters to the sea. Now, of course, you might have caught that Waterman's method of saving this problem is with regulation, right? What we need to do is regulate to save the species, make sure that these things are going to be A-OK with more regulation. The question then becomes, is that going to be enough to try to not necessarily save species in the Colorado River, but also make it so that we here in the Southwest, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada in particular, the states that enjoy the Colorado River more than most, if that is going to be able to provide us with water for the distant future. The problem isn't only in the American Southwest, though. Over in the Midwest, and again, going back to that same article at the Economic Collapse blog, the Midwest Ogallala Aquifer, 2/3 of the volume of Lake Erie has been permanently drained from this underground water source. 2/3 of the volume of Lake Erie was underneath the American Midwest. It has now been used up so that its average depth is only about 80 feet. And the claim is that it can't be replaced, right? And in Texas, it's gone completely and can't be replaced. So we have all this water usage. We have this expanding population. We have this need through just human use, commercial use, agricultural use for water. And it looks as if the United States of America is having a potential water crisis. It's in the early stages of a water crisis. And what do we do about this? Well, Jonathan Waterman says what we need to do is, for the good of the animals, go in there and do some regulation. Let's regulate the use of water to make sure that it is going to be around for a little bit longer. And in fact, right here in Arizona, it seems as if somebody is trying to do something along those lines. Back in 2011, Governor Jan Brewer and the Environmental Reconciliation Bill, which would allow the Arizona Department of Water Resources to assess municipalities' use of water and issue a fine, if need be, had gone ahead into 2012, at the beginning of this year, and issued fines in January to everybody based on the different water that it was using. All municipalities had to pay this fine or eventually face a consequence that amounted to deduction from its portion of state shared revenue. So, for example, if Phoenix, Arizona had used $40,000 worth of water, then Phoenix was going to have to come up with $40,000 to pay the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Else, when tax money was going to be given out, they were just going to deduct $40,000. Now, why they have to pay this, right? If the money is going to be deducted, why force these guys to pay? This seems as if it's just another one of those ring-kissing exercises But in fact, what they're doing, instead of just saying, okay, you're not going to pay, we're just going to take it from you, this is turning into a big thing. Because, quoting from the Arizona Republic again, several municipalities haven't paid or only recently started paying. And where it comes home to the White Mountains, 2 of those are Holbrook and Springerville, which I ordinarily would say bravo. Stand up to the man. But instead, they started making the payments, and the biggest story is down in Phoenix, where Fountain Hills, which I'm sure everybody's familiar, especially because if you drive back to Phoenix through Payson, you're going to pass by Fountain Hills, and they got that giant fountain that sprays straight into the air and can be seen from space or Mars or the moon or something. It's some sort of attraction, and in part because of that, I'm sure, but also in part because, well, who knows. But Fountain Hills has a $28,000 bill that it has not paid and says it won't pay. The mayor in Fountain Hills is saying that we're going to pay this because we're a law-abiding municipality and we want our citizens to see that we do what we ask them to do. Or I guess maybe the concern is if Fountain Hills doesn't pay, the message is to everybody else, don't pay your taxes. Kind of like how my wife says when my kids hear me use the swear words, it's telling them, go ahead and use the swear words. Probably a good point. The difference is if my kids use the swear words, I can't throw them in jail. If you, or, start taking their income or anything like that, if anybody starts not paying their taxes, what is available to the different municipalities to do. So Fountain Hills is trying to make this philosophical thing, but there are many people in the city council that are saying this is bad, this was stupid, and the reason why they're not paying it is the Arizona Department of Water Resources just assumed that the municipalities would provide the water service would then pass the cost on to the customers. Which is a pretty good idea, right? We're running out of water. Let's make the customers pay for it a little bit more. And then, maybe they could regulate their different use of water. The issue in Fountain Hills is that their water is already provided for by a private company. So Fountain Hills can't say, okay, now we need you to come up with $30,000 because the private company wasn't involved in this discussion. And instead, the city is just left with this $28,000 bill. Okay. What we're going to talk about coming into the next segment is the hilarious folly that this is just another example of when any sort of central government tries to get in the way of any kind of free market principle. But in this one, just imagine what would happen, and what we're going to talk about now. If this private company would have realized that water was becoming more precious just because of scarcity. Naturally, what would happen in a truly free market? If I have something that everybody wants and there's very, very few of, ask yourself now, naturally, what is going to happen to this thing's value? Or in this case, if there's no water. Now, remember the Book of Eli. Denzel Washington shocks moviegoers by playing a blind man. And the most valuable thing that these guys had seemed to be sunglasses. Nuclear war makes it especially bright, apparently. And water. Because you can go 3 days without water. All of a sudden, if there's no water, it's more valuable than gold and silver. It's going to be treated more valuable than gold and silver. The state of Arizona was trying to get in the middle of this transaction from something that is becoming increasingly valuable. So what should happen then? Well, that is what we are going to do on the other end of this. This is the DP Show on iTalk 106.7, getting you ready for the BP Show with more coming up after this.